Hi, I'm John Sove, and this is Art and Design. Today, our guest is ML Liebler. ML, I'm glad you're on the show. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Well, I wanted to get into some of your history. Um, I mean, you've done a lot of video work and some recordings. You published a number of books. You're essentially the poet laureate in my mind. You know that, but you
Mhm.
also talk about a certain time period. I know there's a lot of references to the '70s and the Vietnam era. What is the crux of your poetry?
Well, when I'm asked that question, I sort of refer to the poetry being, uh, about a certain time period like the 60s and 70s, but it deals with working class, spirituality, um, political in some ways. Um, Yeah, those things seem to combine in a lot of my work. That the way I see it, anyway.
Well, I know you draw on a lot of references from your own personal experience from that time period too, and you were politically active at the time as
I
well,
was.
right?
Yes, I got involved in. I don't know if I said this before to you, but I got involved in politics at a pretty early age, probably because of the Vietnam War, and I look huge in the screen, but I'm really not that fat. But I
With a PH, ML, with a PH.
yeah,
That's
right.
that in
PH.
my mind. So,
Yeah, fat. Uh so at any rate, yeah, I got involved at an early age, probably due to the anti-war movement when I was in high school at Lakeshore High School. And and then when I got to college, I don't know if I told this story or not. I've just finished my memoir, and all this stuff is in the memoir. So it's kind of fresh in my mind and sort of distant. And by the time I got to the last chapters, I kind of forgot what I wrote in the early chapters of it because it's been so long. But um, when I went to Macomb College early on, and somebody came into one of the English classes, probably composition or something, and asked if they could take a poll or pass out a survey. And they passed out this survey paper, and it just said, one of the questions was, who would you like to see run for president? And I put Abby Hoffman and maybe Jerry Rubin or something like that. And within a day, I got a call from a guy named Ed Bruley. I don't know if that's a name you're familiar with, but he was a student activist and later became part of working for Bonner's office. And in fact, many years later, he got us into Clinton's first inauguration. He got the whole family in for various festivities and tickets to the inauguration and all that stuff. But anyway, he called and said, "We want you to run for precinct delegate in St. Clair Shores." And at that time, I was kind of anti-government per se. Not like nowadays though, not that kind of anti-government. But I just thought, no, I don't want to be in the system. So, but I did it. Eventually, he talked me into it. I did it. I ran as an uncommitted precinct delegate for my neighborhood in St. Clair Shores, and I was off and running in Democratic politics at that point. I think I served a couple of terms. I declared myself uncommitted, unlike many people who committed themselves to McGovern and others. I went uncommitted because I figured by any means necessary, I need to get into office, and it worked. I got more votes than the other people. Someone was committed to George Wallace, and it was 72. So so that's how I formally walked into party politics and stuff like that. So that got me involved in that. I also at Lakeshore, which you went to too. At Lakeshore, I wrote political commentary for the Shoreline, the newspaper there, and I did the rock and roll column too. But I also did that, which got me in some trouble at the time. Yeah, so that was all before the John Birch Society was calling my house. I lived with my grandparents. They were calling my grandparents and threatening me. And there was a little short-haired, yellow-bellied son of Tricky Dicky in one of my classes, and I suspect those were his parents calling me because I'd heard they were in the John Birch Society.
Hasn't really
True
changed at
story.
all. Hasn't changed at all, though, has it?
What's that? The politics or?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, um, we act like this is all brand new, but you were dealing with it back in '72.
Well, that's an interesting point that you're making, John, because I've been thinking about this lately. Um, you know, how new are the things that are happening now, really? How how likely is what's happening now the first time? And it's not. It wasn't. And I've thought a lot about that. I mean, for one thing, watching, people who try to overthrow the government now, especially on January 6th, I thought, what were we thinking back then? I mean, that's an awesome task to try to overthrow a government. I think what we're learning now is it can't be done. So the union stands strong, and from what I can tell. And I think it's going to be showing itself even stronger in the next during this week, probably. But you know what I mean. So I don't regret any of that. I still consider myself a left wing Catholic convert anyway. But that's how I describe myself. And I often will tell students stuff like that. Like if students are thinking, "Oh, he just wants us to think what he thinks." I've often said in my classes, "No, I don't want you to think what I think. I want you to think for yourself. Because if you believe what I believed and believe, you'd be crazy, So no, don't follow me. Don't follow leaders. Watch your parking meters, type of thing. So um, anyway, that's what I've been thinking about with all of this craziness going on lately. Is how hard what would you I've been thinking about, like, okay, so these people want to get in and basically throw everybody who isn't white out of the country. And what would we have done if we were in charge? And it's really hard. I mean, you have to have this infrastructure set up, which, our government actually has that infrastructure. So, and who knew the Republicans would be overthrowing the government? I mean, these are the people we were against back in the day. So anyway, still against.
Well, I like your point because that Robespierre didn't have a real good plan once he got control. You keep losing people so fast when you do that.
Yeah. So but somehow that's factored into my writing and my thinking about things. I mean, going back to that time period. As I said, I don't regret any of it. It's not like, well, I'm older now and I see the, error in my way. No, I don't. No, I look back and say, thank God I did the things that I did and still believe what I believe.
That's called consistency. I
Yes.
appreciate that.
Well, I am totally for consistency. I always used to say, that quote from Taj Mahal song is, I don't care what you do as long as you do what you say you're going to. And I've kind of lived by that ever since I heard that as a teenager.
Well, now you're corrupting young minds, though, and have been for a long time. So,
Well, allegedly, but I was talking to a Republican family member a while ago, and that's I said you probably think I go into classes and talk about the things that I talk about. And the truth is, I don't, because I am open to, I want them to think for themselves. I don't want them to, I want them to become good filters of information and not just sponges sucking stuff up, which is pretty common in our society. You know, just do what Oprah says to do or something like that. And so I'm always, I think, for example, I was thinking back during Clinton's time in office, which was, somewhat early on in my career. I don't think, people knew what I was. I don't know if they thought I was a Democrat or a Republican, because I made fun of, Clinton. Obviously, he had a lot of things to make fun of as his term went on. And I think they might have thought, hey, who is this guy? Is he Clinton? Is he a Republican? And I kind of like that ambiguity, to be honest with you. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, if I'm corrupting their young minds, it's because I'm asking them to become critical thinkers. I've always been big on that in my teaching career is teach people how to think and then they'll make their own decisions.
I think it's a good approach.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it seems to have worked for 43 years for me, so I'll keep doing it. Mm. Yeah.
So wait a second. So you're using poetry to make people think?
Yeah. That's another thing, John, that I often will say in creative writing classes. And I've been saying it since since the 80s. When remember when coffee houses first started coming around, I said, your parents, the thing they fear most is you hanging out at a coffee house, listening to poetry, smoking cigarettes, and drinking coffee. This is going to end the world if, that's how they would see it. This is dangerous stuff. And then my good friend and mentor, Ed Sanders, he wrote this long poem called The Rebel Cafe, where he talks about the history of coffee houses going back to, the Egyptian times. And yeah, they were always a place for, open-minded discussions, revolution, poetry. Once people start reading poetry, it's all over. Like if all Americans were reading poetry, we wouldn't be in this situation right now. That's how I see it.
Well, I happen to like your approach, and it's oh boy. Anyways, we could keep going on down that
Yeah,
road,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
you put it in action too. I mean, you've got the classroom which you've been in for over 40 years, but you're also a community minded person. You've taken on a lot of other programs in the you have literacy programs throughout the city from
Mm.
all different aspects. How did you get started in that?
Well, again, going back to the memoir, there's a part in it where I started doing stuff nationally in Chicago because one of the Ridgeway, I became part of a collective called the Ridgeway Artist Collective, which was on Ridgeway Street in St. Clair Shores, only because that's where, a couple of guys were renting a house that were part of the collective. And I'll say this about the collective. We're still friends. There's a big article on many aspects of the Ridgeway art movement that started in almost 50 years ago in '74 in this online magazine called Threefold. You probably know about that. Threefold.com, I think, or is it threefold.org? Just look up Threefold Online Journal, and it comes out of the coffee house down in the Eastern Market, where all the hipsters play on. You could hear unusual music. What is it? Trinosopes, is it's called, I think, something like
Trina
that.
soap.
That's it. So they're the people behind Threefold, and Carrie Lauren of Bookbeat seems to always have been fascinated with the Ridgeway art movement. His movement was the Destroy All Monsters movement, but he always liked to deep dive into Ridgeway over the years. He always asked me questions about it. And finally, he did this, what is referred to as the Ridgeway dossier, and it's up there for people to see. But anyway, one of the Ridgeway guys, there were five of us, and there still are five of us. We meet every other Tuesday on Zoom. So tonight is a Zoom night for Ridgeway, just to stay in touch with each other. Some still live here, but the film guy, one was a filmmaker. I was writing poetry. Jeff Ensroth was doing art. He went to Lakeshore. Greg Halleck, who also went to Lakeshore, was a photographer, creative photographer. And then Larry Wilson was, part of our group through friendship and at Lakeshore, and he was also on the Shoreline staff with me when I was on that. But the filmmaker guy went to school at Columbia College in Chicago. And once he got settled there, and this would have been 79-ish, I, said, I want to come to Chicago and start doing poetry reading. So I did. He didn't know much about poetry in Chicago, and there wasn't much poetry in Chicago, quite frankly. There wasn't much poetry anywhere. But he saw a sign for an open mic reading in Oak Park because he was working for the Walter Kerr Publishers. That's kind of an anarchist, long-term publisher, and they were across the street from this bookstore. So I went to Chicago. I went to the open mic, and was doing stuff with music. I did a little something with music, and I said, honestly, I'm here looking for gigs if there is such a thing in Chicago. If anyone has any connections, let me know. And I performed a couple of pieces, and the first person to jump up and give me his card was Mark Smith. And he said, I'm trying to start this program. I'm not sure how it's going to go. It's going to be a poetry slam, and it's going to involve a competition with judges from the audience, and I don't know if it's going to work, but the program will be open mic, feature reader, and I want you to be a feature, and then we'll have the slam. And I thought, well, okay, I mean, what the hell? I never heard of that before. So I he said, yeah, I want you to be my feature, and I said, okay, it sounds great to me. And it was at a place called, you'll appreciate this, John. It was at a place called Butchie's Get Me High Jazz Club in Wicker Park, which was a very dangerous neighborhood back then. It was kind of a gang neighborhood. Now it's the chic. Well, it's like Midtown, Midtown Detroit. The Cass Corridor used to be a little bit scary when I first started, and so Wicker Park was like that. So we took the L down there and participated in it. At that time, the feature was the big draw for whatever reasons, and that's where I met a lot of Chicago people, and and then the open mic was a big draw. But the slam, at first, people would leave. They were like, I don't know what this is. What do you mean you're going to hold cards up like at an Olympic thing? So then he invited me back a year later, and it had totally changed. The place was packed. They were there for the slam. I mean, they liked the feature, okay. They didn't care about open mic anymore. But that connected me to a lot of friends in Chicago, poet friends, and I sort of became part of the poetry scene in Chicago. I'd go in, maybe do 11 readings in 7 days. Now I'm also a baseball fan, so I would go and that's when the Cubs only played during the day, and I've been a Cubs fan for a long time. So I would go to baseball games in the daytime, and I would do poetry readings at night. And I did this for like 10 years, enough that people thought I lived in Chicago, and I was a Chicago poet. But I said to my friend from Ridgeway, with actually in the upper deck of Wrigley Field, I said, if I lived here, I would make this a real poetry scene, because it was fragmented and everything. And he goes, well, you don't live here. You live in Detroit, so go home and do it there. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. So I came home and started to build a poetry scene here. And that's kind of the simple way that everything that happened subsequent started. I wanted to make a scene where everybody was in an inclusive scene, and also something that was pretty unheard of, and still is unheard of, is everyone who does stuff for my organizations gets paid. So it's kind of like, I often say, it's like having the union boss, running the company. That's how I see it.
Well, this leads us to your upcoming event at Blossom Heath and St. Clair Shores. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I started this thing in Chelsea now, probably 15 years ago, called the liter. I was the literary artist in residence at their library way back in the early 2000s, and my job was to kind of create programming. And one thing I always wanted to do was to have a poetry walk where you went from place to place within close proximity, and you had different poets read and give, sort of like I always thought of it as a Whitman sampler of poetry. Like they wouldn't give like hour readings. They would give, 10, 12 minutes readings, sell books, move to the next spot and so forth on like a Saturday. So I did that. I started that and it got very successful. We had great readers come in. I had Michael McClure come in, Alicia Ostriker. I mean, I had a lot of Laura Kashicki was part of it over the years. And I'm trying to think, did I have Baraka? I might have had Baraka too. So that I started that, and people came from Detroit to it, and many people said, this is really great, ML. Why can't we have this in Detroit? And I thought, well, one, there's no money in Detroit. And this was being funded in Chelsea's kind of I would say, an upscale kind of area. You probably know about it. And they had about three art galleries on Main Street, so that says something. But I figured out a way to do it in Detroit. So concurrently with the Chelsea walk, I started the Midtown walk, which lasted up until we might even had one during COVID. Um, but while that was going, I thought, why am I doing this? Why don't I do some? I'm the poet laureate of St. Clair Shores since 2005. Why don't I do something like that here in the shores? And since we have, as you know, these three parks, why don't I pick one of these parks and we'll do an outside literary walk around the park? So I brought, thinking, bring the war home. I brought the poetry home. And 5 years ago, we did our first one. And during COVID, we did one or two online, but we went back live about 3 years ago at Blossom Heath. And, I just booked, poets from all around, a lot of Michigan talent, but well-known Michigan talent. And we do this thing, and we do it in Blossom Heath. We started at the park at Blossom Heath that's out by Jefferson Wabi Park. You know, we did the walk around there. But Blossom Heath has that shelter, so that's a really good thing if it rains, and it actually has rained a couple of times, so it's been good.
So, what are the details for this upcoming event?
Well, it's going to be on Saturday, June the 24th, and it starts at noon, and we do what we call sets. And they're each set is three, noted poets or writers. They don't have to be poets; they can be fiction writers. So this year I have a number of good folks, but we start out with set one. I'm trying to do this from memory now. Uh, with Cindy Frankel, who's a wonderful poet from the Huntington Woods area. Linda Wassner, a longtime Detroit poet. I've known her since I started in the scene here back even in the early 80s. Um, and I don't know, do you have the calendar in front of you there or the poster?
I'm gonna look real quick.
I could probably pull it up.
Yeah.
I could probably pull it up myself here. Uh, I was gonna, if we were on Zoom, I would have done a screen share of the of the flyer. But
Yeah.
let's see. So should have it in here easy enough. There it is. Okay, so Jennifer DeBillis in the first set is Jennifer DeBillis. She's a poet and she's a not creative nonfiction writer, and she is, a major part of the Detroit Writers Guild, which is the sponsors of this, major sponsor. And so Linda Wassner, Metro Detroit poet Cindy Frankel, and then set two is a great group of folks. Jan Mordensky, who is really a West Side Farmington Hills poet and a very funny. I've known her since the 70s, because she did a publication, still does it, this Michigan poetry calendar. Christine Ryan is on it. She's an established award-winning poet from Brighton. And then Robert Jones, I'm sure you've seen Robert do his thing before, but he's really become quite a storyteller as well as a singer-songwriter. And I do a lot of work. I've recorded with him. We've done a lot of shows together. And then there's the last set will be, and I like to combine music with the literary thing, probably because of my experience with Ed Sullivan back in the day. Wanting, if I could get a plate spinner, I'd have them on it. But Carolyn Strio, who's a well-known singer-songwriter and a poet, is on it, along with Ryder Bush, who's a performance poet. He's a political activist and does this kind of interesting performance poetry, often with some musicians. And then Vincent Perrone is one of my former students from Wayne State, who is a graduate student now and editing the Woodward Review. And he lives in Grosse Pointe, so I asked him to come over. And then we have I've been doing this poetry workshop at the St. Clair Shores Library since '91. So, and many of the poets that have been part of it have passed away over the years, but the ones who are alive, many of them participate in, I kind of plug them into each of the sets to read a couple of their poems and stuff. So Saturday, June 24th, noon to 3, Blossom Heath Park. It's an outside event. We'll likely set up a Zoom or a Facebook live stream. That's not for sure. Try to move away from that now that we're back live again. And it's sponsored by the St. Clair Shores Library and this program that is happening in St. Clair Shores at Blossom Heath called TIFA, which is the Tax Increment Finance Authority, the Cultural Committee, and then of course the Detroit Writers Guild. So that's the lineup this for this year.
ML, I appreciate that. So just to recap, June 24th, Saturday, noon to 3 at Blossom Heath in St. Clair Shores. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for
Hey, thank
sharing
you.
that. I
Thanks.
appreciate the background. We're going to have to do more in the future. And
Oh yeah, we're gonna bring the Beatles show. We did do that at Blossom Heath in, was it April? Early April. It was a rainy day, but we were inside. They have a new. Have you been up to Blossom Heath lately? They've
not
got
lately. A lot of weddings.
Yeah, well, this is behind it in the park, as you know, and they have built this. It's called a bathhouse, but it's really a wonderful. I've done readings in there, and we did the Beatle thing in there. But the thing is, we're going to bring that Beatle thing. We got to talk about that to Grand Rapids or to Grand Haven sooner than later.
I'm working on that right after this, my next
Okay,
interview.
perfect. Oh, good, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, ML.
Thanks, John.